So welcome back, everybody, to the second day of the conference at the Einstein Forum on Other People's Fascisms. We're going to get underway this morning with Irina Matei, who's visiting us from Bucharest, I believe, and who will be speaking to us about Nazi soft power in Eastern Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank the organizers of the conference and especially Ben for inviting me to this very interesting conference. I will present now a historical case study, so going back a little bit to history here. After Hitler's rise to power in January 1933, German foreign policy changed focus from west to east. Germany had a strong economic interest in developing these relationships, and it provided an opportunity to project a positive image of the Third Reich in East Central and Southeastern Europe in order to promote the so-called German values and support the rise of the far-right ideology and anti-Semitism. All of Nazi Germany's economic and political objectives in this region were sustained by soft power strategies, the so-called Kulturpropaganda, which involved newspapers, book and film distribution, student and academic exchanges, the development of institute and lectureships, and the granting of fellowships. Student exchanges, in particular, were one of the most important propaganda mechanisms used by Nazi Germany in order to project its political and ideological objectives. The foreign students were carefully chosen and closely supervised so that they would adopt and promote Nazi ideology. And here I give a quote from a report produced by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Nazi Germany in 1933. Across all the great cultural countries, studying in another country is considered one of the most effective means of promoting political relationships with other peoples. Besides France, which is ahead of all other nations in this respect, countries such as England, United States of America, and in particular the New Italy, are looking to attract students from other countries through the granting of very generous incentives. In Germany, the concept of foreigners coming to study has achieved a particular character of its own by seeking, first and foremost, to repel undesired and detrimental elements. However, there remains numerous groups of foreigners that it is considered well worthwhile attracting by any means possible in order to arouse their understanding and sympathy for Germany. This is entirely dependent on the success of introducing the foreign guests in an appropriate way to the German people and the essence of being German. To this end, it is absolutely essential that the foreigners are well looked after from the German side, but also that the guiding hand is not allowed to slip over time as greater academic freedom is progressively granted to the foreigners. In order to fully benefit from the foreign students' soft power potential, the Nazi authorities used two types of mechanisms. A mechanism of preferential selection, according to Nazi ideological criteria of the foreign students' political orientation and their propaganda capacity, and the mechanism of instrumentalization of the students for the purpose of ideological transfer. The issues discussed here need to be understood in the broader political and legal context affecting the field of education. The general tendency was to limit the number of students in German universities through the law against overcrowding the German schools and universities. However, the Nazi authorities were simultaneously trying to attract as many foreign students as possible, but not any kind of foreign students. These were divided into two broad categories: die erwünschte und die unerwünschte Studenten. Among the unwelcome were, of course, the Jews, considered to be, I quote, in a natural opposition to the new Germany, and also, I quote, the foreigners who do not feel comfortable, nor should they feel comfortable in new Germany. That was referencing mostly to political orientation of the students. So basically, immediately after Hitler's rise to power, the Jewish students in Germany were victims of expulsion, as we already know, from German university. And I'm not going to insist on this topic, but just a short point that this exclusion was gradual. It was not happening immediately after 1933. They did not disappear completely, starting with 1933, just their number decreased. However, the politics toward Jewish students from other countries was far less coherent in general. On the one hand, it was preferred that the foreign students be racially consistent with the Nazi ideology. On the other hand, in the context of a decreased percentage of foreign students at German universities after 1933, the Nazi regime made concessions in this respect, often allowing the enrollment of Jewish foreign students in its higher education institution. For example, in November 1938, the Minister of Science, Education and National Culture, Bernhard Rust, actually addressed a letter to the rector of the University of Munich saying precisely this, that the foreign students should not be under a subject of the same laws regarding their Aryan or non-Aryan origins when attending German universities. Yeah, this is the quotation from, I'm not going to read it anymore. So different was the treatment of Jewish students who were German citizens from that of Jewish students who were citizens of other states that German Jews were even given the opportunity to renounce their German citizenship in order to receive the same treatment as Jewish students from abroad and to be tolerated in the German higher education system. That only lasted until 1940. By 1940, it was not allowed for even foreign students of Jewish origin to attend German universities. They needed to declare the following: I declare that I am not a Jew, I do not belong to the religious community of Jews, and I am not married to a Jew. Another unerwünschte Studenten was the female students. Their percentage also was in drastic low numbers after 1933, but I'm not going to insist here on that. Also, the number of female foreign students decreased in that period. For example, from Romania from over 20% before 1933 to just 13% in 1934-35, and then further decreasing throughout the following years. The selection of foreign students was made less according to their intellectual or academic capacities and more according to their political sympathies and their propaganda potential, since they were assigned with the task of publicly supporting Nazi Germany's totalitarian and anti-Semitic politics against allegations made by the foreign media. For example, after Hitler's rise to power and as a result of the concerns over the undemocratic regime in Germany, in the autumn of 1933, DAD, the Ministry of Education, and German universities asked foreign students to send letters to their parents and friends at home to inform that things were going well in Germany and that they were safe there. A few months earlier, in April 1933, foreign students mobilized to defend Germany's image abroad. A group of foreigners, there were including a lot of Romanians in this group, studying at the University of Vienna, addressed an open letter to intellectuals from other countries. The letter was highly publicized in Germany, both in the print media and on the radio, and it denounced foreign propaganda as the cause of the drop in the number of foreign students in Germany, describing the atmosphere in the German universities after 30 January 1933 as being one of total freedom, peace, and order. And this is the actual public appeal of those foreign students. Romania itself experienced a constant slide toward the far right during the interwar period, which began almost immediately after the end of the First World War. Romanian universities were the main places driving this change. During the interwar period, the Romanian university milieu was marked by constant outbursts of violence against Jews in general and Jewish students in particular. There were requests for a numerus clausus against Jews as early as 1919, first at the University of Cluj and later also among the nationalist students from Iași, Bucharest, and Czernowitz. The Jewish students from the Faculty of Medicine were particularly targeted, being prevented from taking part in laboratory works with corpses and in autopsies. Also at the law faculties, the nationalist students imposed the ghetto benches. And there were, in addition, In addition, they were boycotting classes, preventing the access of Jewish students to courses, attacking Jews on the streets, vandalizing synagogues and homes, and so on. Several nationalist and anti-Semitic student organizations were established, such as the National Union of Christian Students in Romania. Officially, the state and university authorities banned this type of student actions. Informally, though, they were tolerated since the nationalist students were considered to be, as I quote from a police report from Iași, patriots to the fullest possible extent. Political movements and parties who were openly far-right and anti-Semitic emerged, but I'm not going to delve too much on this. At the same time, the official position of the Romanian state changed from neutrality and sometimes reluctance toward the Third Reich in the early 30s to developing strong economic relations with this country by the mid-30s, culminating with Romania becoming Nazi Germany's political and military ally during the Second World War. Regarding the student exchanges between Nazi Germany and Romania, they developed gradually using various channels. At first, the Romanian authorities were reluctant to allow too many Romanians to study in the Third Reich, out of concern that this would lead to an escalation of the far right and of the already frequently violent anti-Semitic rampages in the Romanian universities. Until 1936, a student needed additional approval from the Romanian Ministry of Education in order to enroll in a Nazi university, since it was considered that, and I quote, all students going to study in Germany are bound to attend Hitlerist courses there. Consequently, the first organized student exchanges, free, very politicized summer schools, were the result of the collaboration between German institutions, especially DAAD, the National Union of Christian Students in Romania, which was an Orthodox student organization, and the Iron Guard. These semi-official summer schools were a project that took place over 3 summers, 34, 35, and 37. The one from 36 did not took place because the Romanian authorities did not allow it. The first summer school that actually happened was in 1934 in Leipzig, the second in Bucharest and Constanța during the summer of 1935, and in 37 in Timișoara. As the German ambassador in Bucharest at the time, Friedrich Werner von Schulenburg, noted, these student exchanges were important, I quote, because it is an outstanding opportunity to gain influence over the Romanian academic youth and to bring them closer to the new Germany. Thus, their program was highly politicized. While the Romanian students attended lectures on German language and culture, which were in fact propaganda courses that promoted Nazi politics and ideology, the German students were touring Romania, visiting legionary camps, and meeting the captain, Corneliu Zelea Codreanu. The selection of the participants was also made based on strategic, political, and propagandistic criteria. The German youth was highly Nazified after 1933, and their purpose during the visit to Romania was to convert their Romanian peers to the far right and to convince them to use their political potential in order to transform Romania in a nationalist, anti-Semitic way based on the Nazi model. The Romanian participants, on the other hand, were deliberately chosen because they were either sympathizers of the Nazi regime or members of the Romanian far-right organizations. At the summer school in Leipzig in 1934, for example, it was arranged that 2/3 of the Romanian participants were to be members of the legionary movement. I quote, "In establishing the list of participants, the leadership of the Iron Guard instructed the Union of Christian Students to give the appearance of a list with independent character, and for that purpose 20 students will be legionaries, chosen from the chief of nests and the legionary groups, and the remaining 10 won't be members of the Guard, but will be supporters of this organization." It was also the case with the other summer schools, it was a report from 1937, which stated that the overwhelmingly majority of the local students stand on the side of the Romanian right-wing parties and feel some sympathy for the Germany of today. It is thus, yes, these politicized student exchanges were part of the transnational fascist network supported by the Third Reich, which presupposed a two-way transfer, even if an asymmetrical one. However, the Nazis had clear one-directional propaganda goals regarding this region. In order to be able to achieve the desired political influence and ideological transfer, the students' exchanges had to occur on a much larger scale and thus needed the support of the Romanian authorities. As the Nazis observed during the 1935 summer school, the legionary movement and the Union of Christian Students, I quote, are not on good terms with the government of the day. Consequently, by 1935, the Third Reich authorities had already changed their strategy regarding Romanian students. Instead of investing in limited summer schools that did not enjoy the support of the Romanian authorities, they decided to develop official mass student exchanges at state level between Germany and Romania. The official student exchanges were the result of Romania growing economically and politically closer to Nazi Germany during the second half of the 30s. But also because, the students' exchanges were initiated in 1945 through a German-Romanian agreement, which stipulated that the Third Reich had to offer German currency at preferential prices, the so-called advantage currency, to at least 650 Romanian students to study in Nazi Germany. So basically, that meant that starting with 1935, at least 650 Romanian students were studying each year in Nazi Germany, but this number increased constantly throughout the next period. For example, in 1937, there were already 760, and by the academic year 1941-1942, there were more than 1,000 Romanian students there in Nazi Germany. This clause was followed although by other agreements which more specific in specific fields. The increase in the number of German scholarships and fellowships was also a sign of Nazi Germany's increased interest in East Central and Southeastern Europe, and Romania in particular, and in the soft power potential of its students. Consequently, the fellowship schemes, most of them were offered by DAD, Mitteleuropäischer Wirtschaftstag, and the Humboldt Foundation, became much more intense and highly politicized after 1933. The Mitteleuropäischer Wirtschaftstag fellowships, for example, were dedicated exclusively to Southeast European students and limited to those studying technical or medical disciplines, economics, agriculture, and forestry. Their declared aim was, I quote, to promote Germany from an economic, political, and cultural point of view in Southeast Europe. Between 1936 and 1940, more than 80 ethnic Romanians, because the scheme was dedicated explicitly only to students belonging to the majority population in their countries. Thus, the fellowship for Romania were only granted to ethnic Romanians, benefited from this Mitteleuropäischer Wirtschaftstag fellowship. All fellows were men. In addition to attending universities, they were also bound to work or be active in the German-Romanian collaboration institutions, and they needed to prove not only professional achievements, but also an interest in politics. The application file of a Romanian applying for a German scholarship contained the application form, CV, German language certificate, matriculation sheets and diplomas, as well as letters of recommendation from professors or personalities of the public life. The latter especially weighted heavily and confirmed the professional but also political potential of the applicant. This explains why some applicants included in their applications references from professors who were either had far-right sympathies or were straightforward enrolled in the legionary movement. For example, in 1938, Constantin Baca was applying for this Mitteleuropäischer Wirtschaftstag stipendium and presented a reference letter from Grigore Manoilescu, a well-known member of the Iron Guard, editor-in-chief of the legionary newspaper The Annunciation, and later director of the Romanian Institute in Berlin, which was a propaganda institution during the war. Baca received the scholarship since Manoilescu, and I quote from the reports of the fellowship, is closely aligned ideologically to the Third Reich, and also because the applicant himself was a member of the Iron Guard, as he mentioned in this cover letter. This scholarship would be of great value to me because the activity of our legionary movement, whose member I am, is today closely linked with the politics of the Reich, and more so would be useful for me to spend this time as a student in the new Germany. This all the more as our captain himself advised us to develop also our professional skills. So, as you see, this is not so much about his academic qualities or scientific, but a lot about his political capacities. Now going further to the Humboldt fellowships, As the documents show, no other fellowship schemes was as politicized and devoted to the aims of Nazi propaganda as the Humboldt Fellowships for foreigners. Founded in 1925, the Humboldt Foundation financially and logistically supported graduates and postgraduates from virtually every country to study and research in Germany for a minimum period of 10 months. The money came from various German public sources, but most of the money came from the German Ministry of Foreign Affairs. During the first years of the foundation existence, between 1925 and 1933, there was a focus on Eastern Europe, but as you can see here, Romania was almost invisible. Actually, I know of only 3 Romanian students who receive researchers. They were actually PhD students receiving Humboldt fellowships between 25 and 1933. But after 33, the awards of the Humboldt fellowships followed the already established patterns of a lot of fellowships for Eastern Europe, but now you can see much more for Eastern Europe in general, also in terms of quantity of fellowships, but also for Romania. You see it's already on one of the first places of students receiving Humboldt fellowships. And basically, by 1941, Romania was one of the countries benefiting most from Nazi Germany's economic, political and cultural interest as a result of Romania's political and military alliance with Nazi Germany, and also because of the new political regime, Ion Antonescu's far-right military dictatorship. Consequently, the Bucharest was the Bucharest was also the capital where the Nazis opened the first of a network of German scientific institutes, Deutsche Wissenschaftliche Institut, that served as Nazi propaganda institutions throughout occupied Europe. Also, there were several collaborations and other type of institutions with Romania. The Humboldt Fellowship as propaganda instrument, I will now go further because I don't have so much time. As in the case of Nazi Germany's foreign student profile, the profile of the Humboldt Fellows changed in order to fit the Nazi ideology and the Third Reich's propaganda purposes. Unofficially, after 1933, Jewish students could not become Humboldt Fellows anymore. When instructing the German authorities from Bucharest about the awarding of the fellowships, the clerks from the foundation gave the following advice, I quote, "It is requested to discourage the applicants with Jewish blood from submitting the scholarship request in a suitable form, such as mentioning to them the already large number of the applications." The chances of women receiving the fellowship also decreased to none. As a consequence, although some very promising young Romanian female intellectuals applied for a Humboldt Fellowship, not even one was successful. In 1938, for example, Alexandrina Maggiaru, the granddaughter of the politician, economist, and sociologist Virgil Maggiaru, was refused the foundation's financial support with the following comment. In principle, it doesn't seem appropriate to consider female students because they won't practice their profession, but instead they will marry. In the end, for them, it's only a pleasant stay abroad. And also because they commented about her that she was, I quote, self-opinioned, quarrelsome, and a fashion doll. In her particular case, one undisclosed reason could have been the politics of her grandfather, member of the National Peasant Party and an overt anti-Nazi. But there are also other examples of female applicants rejected because of their gender, in spite of their excellent professional qualifications. Also, Alice Botez, a student in philosophy at the time, who later became a famous Romanian writer, applied for a Humboldt Fellowship and included in her file a recommendation from Professor Nae Ionescu, who was not only a promoter and collaborator of the legionary movement, but also very appreciated by the Germans. Even if such a recommendation would have normally ensured the success of the application, in her case, the result of the selection committee was negative, stating in their decision, "At this point, we want to restate that we fundamentally oppose the granting of scholarship to female students," and so on. In addition to being non-Jewish and male, the successful candidates had to certify their political and ideological profile and were selected according to their propaganda potential. We will consider only those candidates who, based on their professional qualifications and political options, can do something positive for a German-Romanian cooperation. The selection committee chose only persons who were highly qualified, I quote, highly qualified, already famous in their fields of study, and promising future personalities in their home country, and also who are able to, again quote, quickly adjust in Germany and not only train themselves in their actual academic formation, but also initiate lasting friendships with Germans. In order to certify their political potential, various aspects were taken into consideration: the applicant's CV and their past political and intellectual activity, the recommendations they received from intellectuals who were close either to Nazi cultural milieus or to far-right movements in their country, and their cover letters, in which they stated their attachment to German culture and, in some cases, to the Nazi regime and ideology. Emil Cioran, for example, in his cover letter sent to the foundation in 1933, stated that, I quote, "the Romanian culture could only be saved by its orientation toward the German culture." Ironically, after receiving a 2-year Humboldt fellowship, he ended up in Paris, where he remained for the rest of his life. This case highlights the difficulties in distinguishing the fellow's remarks made out of conviction from those that were the result of opportunistic calculations. When Dumitru Cristian Amzăr received the Humboldt Fellowship in 1938, this was not only because he was a member of the Gusti School and thus had a strong social and professional potential. He was also a member of the Legionary movement. Together with Ernest Bernea, Ion Ionică, and Ion Samarineanu, he was part of the legionary nest AXA. He formed a dissident legionary group within the Bucharest School of Sociology and produced, over a period of 3 years, a pro-legionary magazine, The Order. Another recipient of the fellowship, Romulus Stănculescu, again had not many professional achievements, but he was mentioned in the documents of the Romanian Ministry of Education as one of the most anti-Semitic students, one of the agitators in the Romanian universities. On the other hand, Dumitru Enăchescu, who applied for a fellowship in 1937, received negative feedback in spite of his positive professional profile because of his lack of interest in politics. And this is the quotation from the report. Although there has otherwise been no negative feedback, we don't recommend Enăchescu for the stipend because he doesn't show the slightest interest in national issues. Similarly, Mihai Izbășescu, who later became one of the greatest Romanian Germanists, did not initially receive the fellowship because, I quote, "he shows no understanding at all for national and political questions." Although the Commission admitted that, I quote, he masters the German language so well that one forgets to see in him a non-German. As much as we can extrapolate from the scarce documentation still available, sometimes the Romanian receiving a Humboldt stipend were recommended by professors who were supporters of Nazi Germany or of the Iron Guard. And here especially I want just to mention the very prominent case of Nae Ionescu, who recommended most of the future philosophers that actually studied with Humboldt fellowships. The Germanist Ion Georgiu was one of, Grigore Mănăilescu, the famous legionary, was one of them, and so on. The fellows were not only selected on propagandistic grounds, but propagandistic expectations were also invested in them. In 1934, Kurt Goebel, the executive director of the foundation, expressed these expectations, but I don't have now time to give the quotation. It is very interesting that I selected here some quotations from the reports of the foreign students which are not Romanians, just to see that they focus all on how important it is to have understanding for the Nazi regime and actually accept that a political regime can develop in a certain way. There was definitely a rhetoric there, and I think the key points were understanding for the political regime in Nazi Germany, but I don't have enough time to dwell on this. Sorry, why it's not working anymore? Okay. Yes, because I'm going further to the Romanian Humboldt Fellows. I also had a quotation from an Indian student, but there are several. Sorry, I don't have time now. The evidence quoted above proves beyond doubt that the Humboldt Fellowships were instrumental in the transfer of fascist ideology and anti-Semitism from Nazi Germany to other countries. But how can we assess this transfer in the case of Romania, since most of the documents produced by the selection procedure for the Humboldt Fellowships don't exist anymore? The impact the fellowships had on the dissemination of the far-right ideology and on the political formation and professional development of the Romanian fellows can be convincingly inferred in various ways. From the selection process described above, through the fellows' attitudes during their stay in Germany, as proven by the reports sent to the foundation, to the way they practiced their profession afterwards, either out of conviction or out of opportunism in order to receive an extension of the fellowship, the Romanian awardees fulfilled the role assigned to them by the Nazis. When the foundation decided to extend Victor Pavelescu's stipend for another year, they argued that Pavelescu wrote 2 books, one on the impact of German philosophy on contemporary Romanian thought, and that he was actively and fruitfully involved in German foreign debates in the Humboldt House, showed a very convincing loyalty and gratitude, and will certainly be very useful later in Romania. In awarding Emil Cioran the Humboldt stipend in 33-44 and then an extension the following year, the foundation also seemed to treasure his attachment to Nazi Germany. In addition to study, I quote, "In addition to study, Cioran took an active part in the daily life of the foundation, gave presentation and outstanding reports, and tried in every way to understand the spiritual principles of the new Germany. There is no doubt that he managed to understand this issue more profoundly than the majority of the foreign students. As a representative in Berlin of the press organ of the Iron Guard, he was able to present also in the periodicals in his home country the developments in Germany." And this is, they're addressing the articles that Cioran sent to the Times newspaper in Romania, which were fiercely pro-anti-Semitic and pro-dictatorship, not only Nazi dictatorship. He also wrote in the same year, Emil Cioran, to a friend in Romania, "Only a dictatorship can impress me now. People don't deserve freedom. And I sadly think that people like you and others are wasting their time by making the apology of a democracy which in Romania couldn't lead to anything." And I also have other examples of for example, this is also a philosophy student, Constantin Sândulescu-Godeni, who is a very interesting character because he appears in the documents also throughout the Cold War, although he never managed to actually forge a career as a philosopher. And he received 3 years a Humboldt Fellowship, and actually this is from his report. "As I studied earlier in Berlin, I knew well the political situation before the revolution, the economic crisis, the terrible unemployment." But then what is interesting here is that he speaks about Hitler's true will for peace, which is also something that appears very often in those reports. Some of the Romanian philosophers who benefited from a Humboldt Fellowship showed in their philosophical works concerned with the national specificities and spiritual future of their home countries, inspired by Herder's philosophy and strongly influenced by Martin Heidegger, which is a professor at the University of Freiburg during this time, and actually had a philosophical seminar where there were many, many Romanians attending it. Ovidiu Papadima, for example, who was a Humboldt stipend recipient between 38 and 41, wrote about the Romanian vision of the world. Also, Emil Cioran wrote his Transfiguration of Romania, where although this work was not exactly in the spirit of what the Nazis would have wanted from him, probably. Similarly, Dumitru Cristian Amzer also was a Humboldt Fellow and then remained in Germany, and after the war he founded in 1954 in Wiesbaden the association, the Orthodox Brotherhood, which aimed to promote religious works on Romanian writers such as Nae Ionescu and Nikifor Crainic, which were both former supporters and ideologists of the Iron Guard, and published through his efforts alone several issues of the journal The Orthodox Brotherhood, organ of action for orthodoxy and Romanianness. In order to be truly useful for Nazi propaganda, the Romanian Humboldt Fellows had to occupy key positions in the Romanian academia or state apparatus. This explains the German interventions in favor of former Humboldt fellows. In 1937, for example, Ewald von Massow, the director of the DAD, wrote to the German legation in Bucharest asking them to recommend Sândulescu Godeni for a position at the Royal Foundation King Carol II. Actually, he did not receive that position, but only because he was a legionary. Some of the Humboldt Fellows also enjoyed the support of the Romanian authorities, especially given the political context and Romania's orientation towards the Third Reich, which involved the need for diplomatic personnel who spoke German and had good connections in Nazi Germany. Consequently, during the war, 4 out of the 10 lecturers of Romanian language in the Reichs universities were former Humboldt stipend recipients. Eventually, however, the conflict between Antonescu and the Iron Guard shattered the prestige and influence of the Romanian former Humboldt Fellows, as many of them were members or sympathizers of the Iron Guard, and thus distrusted by Antonescu after the legionary rebellion of January 1941. In this context, for example, most of the lecturers, former Humboldt Fellows, were asked to come back to Romania, and also most of the legionary, the Humboldt Fellows and members of the Legion who were working in the Romanian Institute in Berlin were asked to come back in the country. This presentation illustrates the various means used by Nazi Germany to transform foreign students into propaganda tools. My main focus was on students receiving financial support, as they were particularly dependent on the Nazi bureaucracy and interested in pleasing their financial and logistical sponsors in order to continue receiving a stipend. In addition, the prestige of the Humboldt Fellowships meant that the fellows had important professional political potential. The case of the Romanian Humboldt Fellows is relevant because it's one of the actually relatively few cases where there is adequate documentation to support an argument about the Nazi soft power in this region. And also it speaks about university milieu in both Germany and Romania, which were radical and mainly oriented towards the far right. It also shows that possessing a far-right vision of the world and being active in such a way was a precondition for achieving success in academia and in highly qualified professions, and also that the academic youth in Europe spoke a common language and shared common values, those of the far right, which enabled intense transnational collaborations and political and ideological transfer. And a little bit about the Humboldt Fellowships during the Cold War. And this is actually the research that I'm doing now. I'm preparing a book on this topic. It's very interesting because the Humboldt Fellowship ceased to exist after 1945, and it was reorganized in West Germany in 1953. And they sustain, even nowadays, that they cut all ties with the former Humboldt Foundation, and all their official history starts from 1953. But actually, in 1965, Romania retook diplomatic, economic, and cultural collaborations with West Germany, and this is when Humboldt Foundation started to advertise again in Romania and invites fellows. And in spite of the fact that they said that they cut all connections with the former Humboldt Fellows, actually what they did in order to redevelop the relationships with Romania was to invite the former Humboldt Fellows from during the interwar period and the war. And not only that they were not invited actually to apply for the fellowship, but to come directly to Germany with a fellowship. So they were a priori awarded this fellowship. Also, because when the retake of the Humboldt fellowships happened after a period of pause of 20 years in academic relations between Romania and West Germany, the students and researchers who wanted to go to Humboldt fellowships, they needed a recommendation letter from a West German professor. And where from would they receive that? So basically what they did was to address their former professor who used to be students or had connections in the former Nazi Germany, who would write to their former friends in West Germany, which would afterwards invite the new Romanian scholars. So this is kind of interesting because although it was not the focus of the communist regime to send philosophers, for example, to study in West Germany, they would have preferred to send physicists. There were a lot of philosophers who also during the Cold War received the Humboldt fellowships, most of them recommended by Noica, who used to be a former student in Nazi Germany and actually not a member of the legionary movement, but a supporter and ideologue of the legionary movement. And some of these intellectuals, is very interesting that after going to West Germany with Humboldt fellowships, in the 90s, they became public intellectuals in Romania. And although they had, of course, democratic values and so on, they had this stance of anti-communism and Western type of democratic perception. And they were highly influential in 90s and 2000 in the Romanian culture. The most famous are Andrei Pleșu, which was also the Minister of Culture, and Gabriel Liceanu, who has the most important publishing house in Romania. And they created this Romanian trend of reanalyzing the fascist past of Romania, and especially the intellectuals from the interwar period, and presenting that cultural episode in the Romanian culture as the golden age of the Romanian culture. So even though they were not going in, they were very conservative, definitely. They still are, and even if they didn't go into the direction of the far right, a lot of intellectuals which are now members of the far right movement in Romania, were coming from this 90-2000 area of Humanitas publishing house and praising those interwar intellectuals. And maybe a little bit about the Humboldt fellowships, even nowadays and throughout the Cold War, as soft power more than academic institution. I want to quote this: worthy of special mention is the fact that many Humboldtians sponsored under a fellowship program at universities and research institutions in Germany during the Cold War now hold leading positions in government, legislatures, and juridical, and contribute substantially to the shaping of the democratization process in Central and Eastern Europe. The Foundation sponsorship programs are not designed primarily to produce leading politicians, but it has been proven that science, which is essentially international and open, constitutes the medium through which a disproportionately large number of the members of the new elite are recruited.
Thank you very much. I think we've still got a little bit of time for questions. Why don't we go ahead and open the floor? Yes, Dominic?
Thanks. This wasn't the main part of your talk, but just at the end, right, where you were talking about the influential figures in Romania who were anti-communist conservatives and had Humboldt scholarships in the 90s. Did I understand that correct? No.
70s and 80s.
70s and 80s. What particularly about their experience in West Germany shaped them in that way? Or do you think that was unrelated? Was it, what kind of connection were you drawing between those two moments, the 70s in West Germany and anti-communism in the 90s in Romania?
Yes, so they were already coming from an older tradition of anti-communist vision of the world and perspective. It was they were supported also by the national communist regime, because Ceausescu developed in this way, and kind of he also retook connections with Western Europe after 1965. That didn't last long, but still, and also had this kind of nationalist ideology, like presenting Romania as a big culture, and actually, of course, denying any involvement in Holocaust and so on, but also like recuperating those far-right or nationalist intellectuals from the interwar period, because now they would serve its purpose of writing in an exceptionalist way about Romania, about its history, about its spirit, and one of those was recuperated intellectuals was Constantin Noica, for example, and he basically built a school, the School of Polteniș, of philosophers who were basically developed not only to be philosophers on this Hegelian and then Heideggerian way, but also to be public intellectuals at some point. And it's very interesting because they were in a way dissidents, right, of the Romanian communist regime, but in the same time they enjoyed all the favors that were not allowed to other type of philosophers or intellectuals in communism, like to go to West Germany and stay there for 1 year. It was not that easy actually to achieve such a thing. And they were developed in this kind of anti-communist, not anti-communist, but very nationalist, exceptionalist tone, with praising the interwar Romanian culture, which was a moment of development, and only the communists cut that wonderful development, and Romania was almost there together with the big cultures like German or French culture, but then the communists came and destroyed everything, you know. So, but what could have been more a stronger argument that Romania was going in the interwar period in a good direction than that Cioran or Eliade, look, they were the representatives. They went abroad and they were recognized. We would have been also recognized. And there was a second layer of this kind of intellectuals who always thought if we would have stayed in Germany after 1945, we would have been Eliade or Cioran, you know? They were just, yeah, we could have been. And then in the 90s, they also have a larger voice because it was after the communist regime, and they were also, they took the costume of public intellectuals, guiding light of how Romanian culture should develop. They are not that influential nowadays, but they were highly influential in the 90s and 2000s, and we call them MIR, which big Romanian intellectuals, which actually the acronym means a religious thing, which people from countryside use in order to make their body or their clothes to be heilig. I don't know how to say this.
Holy.
Holy, yeah, but this is a
sacred.
mock. It's a mock word now, mir, of course. Yeah.
Antonio, you had a question? Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Just two questions about the Romanian cultural elites in the 1930s, and in a way the different political families, the conservative right or the radical right and the avant-garde fascist. The first question is related to the German, let us say, cultural policy towards Romania in that period. Was there a sort of a positive discrimination of avant-garde members or students or intellectuals? Because, as you know, there are a lot of tensions in the avant-garde, during the royal dictatorships, etc., etc. There are lots of tensions between these conservative elites and the avant-garde. And the second related question is the following: can we does the specific nature of German National Socialism in terms of external cultural policy makes a difference in terms of the natural selection of conservative elites in other European countries for this kind of grants? Of course, with the typical question, of course, of Jews and and some specific negative discrimination.
Thank you for the questions. Indeed, the Romanian right and far right was very, very divided. And for example, in the elections from 1937 in December, where the legionary movement received his highest percentage of votes, 16%, there were 5 far-right political parties there. So you can imagine, some of them were even parts which came from the liberal or conservative party. So the actual percentage that the far right received at those elections was 40%, but was very divided between political parties. But Germans, from what I saw, did not care about this. So they actually didn't care so much if student or an applicant for the fellowship was in the legionary movement or in the Liberal Party of Gheorghe Brătianu, which was also very anti-Semitic and nationalistic. They cared to be on the same line with because they didn't care about internal developments. It is true indeed that most of the students were members of the legionary movement, because the legionary movement attracted the students, while the Liberal Party of Gheorghe Brătianu attracted like former mainstream politicians which were not happy with what's happening in Romania, and then people over 40 who didn't trust students as politicians. So, and the second was if there is something specific to the German type of national socialism in this, you mean if the Italians were selecting also in the same way, or?
Yeah.
Well, I didn't study those case studies. But I would say that probably the Germans were much more organized than other, I don't know, selection committee. Yeah, exactly.
Good. Richard, you had a question. Please brief, because we have very little time.
Okay, I'll keep it under 20 words. And I'll count as I speak.
Good.
I thought that was fantastic, Irina. I really enjoyed it. It was extremely rich and important. I just wonder if you'd ever thought of expanding your focus to the period of World War II, especially a related phenomenon. I think you alluded to that, which the Deutsche Institute, which was also administered by the Auswärtiges Amt. I mean, this is, I know there's some material on this in German that's very good, but I think this is a fascinating topic of the Nazi preoccupation with European cultural hegemony.
Yeah, I actually co-wrote a book about the Romanian Institute in Berlin, which was a propaganda institution and has also been translated to German 2 years ago. And yet this is very interesting. With the German Institute in Bucharest, there was an important Germanist, Gamilshek, who have a very important role there. Yeah, I might write an article about that specific case study. I do have plenty of material. Yeah.
Good. Let us thank our speaker.